silent movies made in Montecito, California. They're available behind the counter. Bethany, Dee, Alec, and Madeline will be there to serve you gladly. We do ask that you purchase the book prior to getting it signed. If you need to use the restroom, it's straight down through this computer aisle all the way through the back of the store. And please, at this moment, if you could silence your cell phones so we can give our author her deserved attention. So let's begin. Today we are very pleased to bring Betsy Green. She's been a writer for more than 25 years, editor at Reader's Digest and World Book Encyclopedia in her misspent youth. As a freelancer, she contributed articles to newspapers and magazines in the U.S. and abroad. She specializes in writing about local history, architecture, and the environment. She has written 7 books about Santa Barbara history, including the Way Back When series and Mesapedia. In her spare time, she writes The Great House Detective, which is a wonderful column for the Santa Barbara Independent. Please welcome Betsy Green. So, Santa Barbara has a great history of movies. Most recently, you go out to the Barnstall Oil, the gas station out there. That's where Postman Always Rings Twice was filmed. Go to the Gaviota Tunnel where The Graduate was filmed. There's a lot of places out there, including even North County, as many of you know, that Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments set is buried in Northern California in the dunes by Guadalupe and Nipomo. But Betsy has delved even further back than all of these through movies and $1 Million Mansions, silent movies made in Montecito. She's harkened back to a silent era where Santa Barbara was the king of movie making. And there are so many films that were made here that a whole book wouldn't do it justice, because she's done a whole book on Montecito alone, which is incredible. Congratulations, Betsy.
Thank you.
So I got to ask you, before you do your talk, how did this project come about?
Well, I wrote a series of books called Way Back When, Santa Barbara in 1914, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And in doing so, I got really involved in the history of Santa Barbara in that time period. And the Flying A was a huge newsmaker there. They were making movies all over the place. There were articles in the newspaper about them. And back then, they didn't need permits. They just sort of go out and send a guy into the street or with a fake gun and start shooting, and people would freak out and call the cops, and then they could see the movie camera grinding in the background. It's like, oh, it's those Flying A guys again. And in doing so, I got really interested, and I started trying to watch silent movies myself. And I found that silent movies, in a way, are a way to transport yourself back to the past, to see what towns looked like at the time, what people wore, how they acted, how they spoke. Well, the title cards tell you how they spoke.
So your idea to put this all together, where did that idea come from?
Well, I knew that the Flying A made about 1,200 movies.
Yeah.
So I knew that was way too much to tackle. So I thought, well, I knew that they had made some in Montecito at some of the big estates there. So I thought, well, okay, maybe I'll write about that. And I kept finding more and more and more. It went way beyond Flying A. Flying A made maybe about half of them, but the other half, companies came up from Hollywood to use the estates that looked like ancient Rome or France in the time of Louis XIV or whatever. So it was an amazing time.
One last question before you go into your talk. As far as the whole process of making this, you did it during COVID. And did COVID take a part in your deciding to write this book? And talk a little bit about the process of creating this book.
Well, because of COVID, I was stuck at home. Just about everything closed down. And fortunately, the internet kept working. And I know from my research that some of the Santa Barbara newspapers are online now. And then I also knew that some of the movie magazines were online and searchable. And so I just thought, well, I'll just sit here and spend some quality time with my computer, and at least I got something done. Yeah.
That must have been a ton of research, though, as far as the newspapers. I mean, what was that like?
Fortunately, they're searchable. It's not that you have to look at every page. I could just search for movie making or photoplay or some of the old words that they used. Or Flying A was was another one as well.
Interesting. So let's talk about it.
Okay. All right. Well, Santa Barbara was one of the reasons why movies were made here in Santa Barbara and why the Flying A, the American film company, settled here, is that Santa Barbara people welcomed film people. A lot of towns did not want film people or theater people in their town. Don't let your daughters near that guy, whatever. But Santa Barbara was very interested in tourism, as we still are now. And everybody was beginning to realize that movies reached far more people than books or magazines or newspapers. And movies were a way of showing people what Santa Barbara looked like, and hopefully people would see Santa Barbara and then want to come here. Now, normally when I do this, I do it as a slideshow. So, because I'm talking about movies, I do have some cards with a picture of each movie, and I'll pass them around as I'm talking about it there. So people who know me know I have a great sense of humor, and I use this in my writing. So in this book, there's a lot of information that I gathered during COVID, and I had a lot of fun writing the summaries. I read through the summaries for each movie in the movie magazines at the time, and then I imagined I had seen the movie and was explaining it to a friend the next day, sort of in a casual way. So the first one going around was 1911. The movie was called The New Faith. I was surprised to find that the earliest commercial movie made in Montecito had a religious theme. This movie was filmed at the Gillespie Estate by a Hollywood film company. This estate was the most popular one for filming. Okay. Now, the movie features men wearing sandals and skirts. A Roman patrician named Caius Valerius is intrigued by a slave girl who is a Christian, which is what the New Faith is all about. When she saves his life by pulling a tarantula off his neck, he falls for her and her religion. So he invites her to shack up with him. She admits she loves him, but declines his kind offer of an extramarital relationship. Somehow, that makes him love her even more. Next, he asks her to marry him, but before they can find a priest and do the right thing, they are both killed by some nasty Roman patricians. As the movie ends, they die in each other's arms. 1913, Trapped in a Forest Fire. This is a Flying A movie filmed in Sycamore Canyon. In the years before studios had big budgets for special effects, movie crews improvised to take advantage of natural disasters such as fires and floods. One day, the folks at Flying A noticed a cloud of smoke toward the mountains. The local paper reported, "At first they thought it was a building in the city, but decided to take advantage of it for a moving picture scene. All available players were secured. The journey brought them to the fire, and as the imagination worked quickly, the players were sent through some exciting stuff with flames and smoke serving as settings, all of which will be made part of a photo play still to be constructed." So here's the story. This is a movie in which an incredible amount of action is crammed into a one-reel film, about 10 minutes. A group of young people is at a hunting lodge, and each of them seems to be in love with someone who loves someone else. Everyone is trying to kindle a spark, but without results, until someone throws a smoldering cigarette butt onto some dry leaves. Fire. People are missing, people are rescued, people fall in love. The most notable part of the movie is that the studio rushed up to the hills above Santa Barbara to film a forest fire in Sycamore Canyon, had some actors run around amidst the flames, and then built a story around it. The expression, "Don't worry, it's only a movie," doesn't apply here. The fire was very real, and some of the cameramen were overcome by the smoke in the making of the movie. 1914, The Envoy Extraordinary. This movie was produced by a short-lived local film company known as the SB. It was filmed at 4 separate Montecito estates. This film takes place among the diplomatic and ruling classes of Europe 2 years in the future, and unwittingly predicts World War I. Some wealthy residents of Montecito financed this film, and quelle surprise, they appear in the movie dressed as European royalty. So here's the story. There's the usual romance and intrigue, plus a polo game. An honest-to-goodness German baron plays a German baron in the film. Someone climbs a cliff, someone walks the plank, but in the end, ho-hum, the hero and heroine tie the knot. The assistant cameraman for this movie was Victor Fleming, who later went on to direct Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz.
Oh, no.
So,
Wow.
Fascinating.
smart crowd here, I guess. Okay, 1916, Purity. Purity is an allegorical drama created by the Flying A. The star of this movie was famous for posing au naturel for sculptors and artists. So you can guess what happens in this film. To give the appearance that this is an art film and not porn, the movie begins with a scene from Greek mythology showing Pandora opening a box and letting evil escape into the world. This is also an excuse for actresses to traipse around in flimsy costumes that you know their mothers would disapprove of. Then the movie switches to the present day. A girl named Purity is in love with a penniless poet. He can't afford to self-publish his poetry, so Purity decides to earn some money for him. Lacking an education and marketable skills, she decides to take off her clothes and pose nude for sculptors and artists. This is a pre-code movie, so she really does take it all off, for art's sake, mind you. The poet boyfriend is peeved when he learns about her activities au naturel and dumps her. However, after his book is published and he becomes famous, he learns that she did it for him. He mans up and runs to find her. Fortunately, he finds her before she's thought about sticking her head in the oven. They are reunited, and another movie ends with a happy couple headed to the altar. Usually, the Flying A did not mind spectators watching filming, but they made an exception for this movie because of the scanty costumes on the young ladies. 1917, The Bottle Imp. The information for this movie was full of what I call movie magazine malarkey. It was said to be filmed in Hawaii with a genuine Hawaiian princess as the star. But no, it was filmed in Montecito, and the actress was from San Francisco. This movie was produced by a Hollywood film company, and the folks in Hawaii were upset that it was not filmed on their island. This film could have been titled, Be Careful What You Wish For. A poor fisherman in Hawaii falls in love with a Hawaiian princess. Problem to be solved. The fisherman goes to the mountains where he buys a magic bottle with a genie or imp inside. It's a run-of-the-mill genie who grants your wishes, so the fisherman wishes for and gets a palace and servants and marries the princess. But then problems arise. The genie dude gets mad at the fisherman and gives him leprosy. The fisherman wants to sell the bottle, but if you don't sell the bottle for less than you paid for it, the punishment is death. The story gets even more complicated after that, but somehow the nasty genie dies, a volcano erupts and destroys the fisherman's palace, and he's back to living in a thatched hut. But he still has his princess, and they are happy with their simple life on the beach.
Glad I could understand.
1918, Stella Morris. This is a film featuring Mary Pickford, one of the biggest stars of the silent era. I discovered it accidentally while I was just watching the movie for fun, and I recognized the location as part of a Montecito estate. So the lives of two young women come together by way of a man who is loved by both of them. One is a rich young lady who is crippled, the other is an orphan who lives in a grim asylum. The man's wife is an abusive drug addict. He visits the rich woman, who is a distant cousin, and falls in love with her, and leaves his wife. His wife takes the orphan to work for her as a servant. and then she's abusive to her as well. When she beats the orphan unconscious, the man adopts the orphan out of pity. Eventually, the rich woman is cured and able to walk. She then discovers that the man she loves is married. In the end, the orphan solves everyone's problem. She kills the abusive woman and commits suicide. Problem solved. The movie ends happily as the rich woman and the man come together at last. Mary Pickford played both the rich woman and the orphan, which was sort of an unusual thing in those times for the movie technology, and she looked dramatically different in both roles. At one point, she dressed up in her makeup as the orphan, and walked through the studio, and no one recognized her. 1920, Phantom Melody. This is a horror film made by a Hollywood film company. It's a film that deals with life after death. This was the theme of a couple of movies in Montecito. Movies about the afterlife were popular after all the deaths from World War I and the Spanish flu. It was a way of people coping with that. So the film is set in a mansion in Italy during World War I. It's the eternal triangle all over again. Two men love the same woman. However, this story is livened up, so to speak, by one of the men being buried alive by his rival. But no problema. The guy who was buried alive somehow manages to escape from his coffin, although the trauma has turned his hair white and nobody recognizes him when he returns. In the meantime, his rival escapes the draft by tricking another guy to go in his place. So if we weren't sure that the rival was non buono because he buried someone alive, now we know that he is also a draft dodger. And yet somehow he tricks the woman into thinking he is Mr. Nice Guy. The back from the dead guy becomes a music teacher in the mansion where the woman lives and is able to observe all of this undetected. Everything turns out molto bene when the woman learns that the rival is a coward. The back from the dead guy plays a song that causes the woman to recognize him. And then they finally pair up at the end of the movie just as the credits start to roll. There was an interesting product tie-in in this movie. For the first time in his career, the maker of caskets was able to get views of the user of his product. The undertaker asked the actor for a photograph of himself in the coffin with a testimonial to be used in trade journals. The actor obliged him with the picture requested, inscribed as follows: "Having used your coffin, I find it so delightful that I hope to use no other for many years to come." 1921, Two Wise Wives. This was filmed by a Hollywood film studio. It was directed by Lois Weber, a famous female director, and this is the second movie that she filmed in Montecito. This film was directed by a woman, so it's not surprising that the two wives are the focus. What is surprising is that both women are, despite the title, downright clueless. Wifey number one, married for love, but tries too hard to please her hubby number one. She gets pouty when he spills ashes on her nice, clean carpet, and then gets tearful when he's reluctant to wear the slippers that she crocheted just for him. Wifey number two, married for money, and oh, by the way, she was the ex-girlfriend of hubby number one. Complication here, since wifey number two still has the hots for her ex-boyfriend, aka hubby number one. Wife number one knows about the ex-girlfriend, but she's jealous because she reads her husband's mail when she isn't keeping the house spotless or crocheting slippers. And then, wouldn't you know it, both couples end up spending the weekend together. Wifey number two makes a play for husband number one, and just as wifey number one happens to enter the room. In the end, both couples come to appreciate their respective spouses, and the film ends on a happy moral note. 1923. The Voice from the Minaret. This was filmed at an old polo club in Montecito. The polo club was decorated to look like a polo club in India. Frank Lloyd was the director. He later directed Mutiny on the Bounty
Wow.
with Clark Gable. Okay. This movie begins with a nasty husband. You knew that, right? You were just going to say that. Okay. This movie begins with a nasty husband, a British governor in India under the Raj, and an unhappy wife. When the wife discovers that the Gov is fooling around, she gets on the next boat for dear old England. On board, she meets a missionary who is bound for Damascus. They fall in love and both disembark in Damascus. But eventually, the voice from the minaret makes them feel guilty, and they end their relationship. The wife returns to the governor the Gov in England, in India, and she and the Gov return to England. Okay, ready for an amazing coincidence? Happens all the time in movies. Guess who shows up as the minister of a nearby church in England? Somehow the Gov learns of his wife's past tryst with the minister, but not to worry. The Gov pitches a fit and keels over stone dead. Problem solved. Next to the last one here, 1925, Her Husband's Secret. This was produced by a Hollywood film company. Like Father, Like Son could have been the title of this film that involves a couple of secrets, as well as another amazing coincidence. The movie opens with the prologue set in 1900 at a seaside estate featuring a married couple. The husband had a secret life that his wife was unaware of when they married. He was a sly dog, according to one movie magazine, who could pile on the charm with the feminine sex. He goes on a binge one night and brings home a bunch of rowdy companions. When his wife objects, he leaves and takes their young son with him. Fast forward 25 years. The son is a banker who is up to no good. He is also a ladies' man who manages to charm the daughter of a banker that he's been bilking. And get ready for the amazing coincidence, the banker lives next door to the young man's mother. Things unravel in a hurry when his mother learns who he is and that he has inherited his father's evil ways. The young man has a change of heart and tries to atone for his sins by leaping off a cliff. Don't try this at home. Apparently this works for him because he survives, the banker is impressed with his dramatic deed, and allows his daughter to marry the young man. Another happy ending, sort of. So this estate was on Channel Drive, and the leading actor, Antonio Moreno, refused to use a double and jumped off the cliff onto the beach himself.
Oh.
Last one. 1928. We've come to the last silent movie filmed in Montecito, called OK. It was based on a Gershwin Broadway musical, so I'm sure that music from the show was played when the film was shown in theaters. This movie combines mistaken identities and bootleggers during Prohibition. A lord in England wants his daughter to marry a man she hates, so she jumps on a little sailboat and heads out into the Atlantic Ocean. Why not? Anyway, during a storm, she's rescued by a ship full of rum runners headed for New York. After they land, she eludes the cops and hides in a Long Island mansion. The mansion's owner is supposed to get married the next day, but that doesn't stop him from falling in love with the Lord's daughter. Of course, he doesn't know who she is. Before the mansion owner and his fiancée can say, "I do," the cops raid the mansion for serving liquor, and the bride-to-be says, "I don't." Somehow, the police leave empty-handed, and the mansion owner and the Lord's daughter say, "I do." And so, the last silent movie made in Montecito ends happily. So the silent era came to an end in the late 1920s. A lot of people were reluctant to say goodbye to the silence. Some folks felt that if it ain't broke, why fix it? Some people said movie-going had been a more restful experience when there was just live music playing during the showing of a film. Other people felt that dialogue, in English, limited movies' appeal. Mary Pickford famously said, "We lost the world market when we began to speak." And as they say, the rest is history. I hope you enjoyed this summary. I'll have time for questions. This is I am doing this as a slideshow, September 10th at the Montecito Library, September 28th at the History Museum, and I have some flyers here if you're interested in presentations for your groups. So, any questions, comments? Sure.
Where was the fire that was in Sycamore Canyon? part of it?
I don't know, they didn't say, they just said Sycamore Canyon. Yeah, it was 100 years ago, so.
Oh, I have a question.
Sure.
What was the Broadway play that they did the music for? Okay.
Oh, it was called O, comma, K-A-Y. The woman's name was Kay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. To me,
Oh,
it's just
okay.
really strange. Yeah, it's really strange that they made a silent movie about a musical.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
it's
they-
the same name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, they also made a silent movie here, one that I didn't talk about, based on an opera, The Dumb Girl of Portici, which is based on the opera Masaniello. But obviously, there was always sound when the movies were being shown. Somebody was singing songs from the opera, or at least playing songs from the opera. So it was an interesting time.
Yeah.
So were you able to identify most of the mansions that are mentioned in the film?
It sort of during the first half of the period, they mentioned the name of the mansion in the movie advertisements. And in a way, it was a vicarious way of seeing the Gillespie the Gillespie estate or whatever. And it used to be that these mansions were open to the public in like the 19 teens. On Sundays, a lot of these places were open and people from Santa Barbara could just go and look. So it was kind of a thrill to see, a place that you were familiar with. Or for people around the country, oh, that's what it looks like. I'll never get to go there. Then in sort of the second half of the time period, I think people got tired of saying, oh, I've seen the Gillespie Mansion in 3 movies already. I don't need to see it again. So they stopped mentioning the name of the movie, the name of the mansion. Sorry. Yeah, good question. But for about 20 of the 65 movies, I was able to match up a scene from the movie with a scene with a photo of the estate. I think on the cover certainly you could see that.
A
Yeah.
more current photo of the
Not a
state?
current photo.
Oh,
No,
but
I'm
of
mostly
that period.
focused on the mansions as they were. A lot of them are gone, or divided, or they're private. People don't want looky-loos driving up the driveway saying Betsy told me, and it's like, oh boy,
True.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, do you have a background on the movies themselves? Like, are they all 10 minutes?
I do list that in here. It's basically the number of reels is listed in here. A reel was about 10 minutes. So the first one, The New Faith, was 10 minutes long, and they just crammed so much in. Toward the end, they got to be 5 and 8 reels long, so it'd be 50 or 80 minutes long.
I was curious on the budget. Any idea on like a budget for one reel?
No, it kind of depended where they were and who the actors were and what they needed to arrange for. In general, the actors, unless it was a period movie, the actors used their own clothing. So the more, the bigger the wardrobe you had, the more chances you had of being cast as something. But if they needed to hire somebody's boat or something like that, that would certainly add to the cost. Unless someone was nice and let them use it. I mean, as far as I know, they didn't pay anything to the mansion owners. They just, were able to do it. So.
Where could you typically watch a movie? Was it regional? Once it was
Back then?
produced? Yeah.
They went all over.
Okay.
In fact, some of the ones that survive are like in Czechoslovakia or Australia or whatever, or Alaska. They sometimes rented the movies, so they went out and came back. Other times, for distant locations, they just sent them out, like to Alaska. In fact, they recently, 10 or 20 years ago, discovered a whole bunch of old movies underground in Alaska. They went to the theater, they just stayed there, and they buried them because they didn't really want them. But somehow that allowed some of them to survive. Sure.
Are any of these films online that are?
Yes, I have a list in the back. There's about
Okay.
5 or 6 of them that are
That's
online. In
great.
fact, the Mary Pickford movie, I mentioned I happened to be watching it on YouTube, and I recognized the location.
Wow.
My neighbors probably wondered why I was screaming.
So Betsy, oh, go ahead.
And what happened to the Flying A Company? Were they absorbed by another?
Well, the Flying A switched to longer movies, and that was the trend in general. So they needed fewer people. And so if you weren't on a particular movie, there was nowhere else to go in Santa Barbara. Whereas in Hollywood, if you were not working for Selig Polyscope, you could get a job with Universal or Fox or whatever. So that's where we really lost out. But
Wow.
we were the only game in town.
Do you have a favorite part of your research, like a favorite movie that you researched that really struck your heart?
Well, the one that I found by accident is the one that's
Yeah.
I did so much research online, and not everything's online. It's so and that there's nothing online about this movie, but it's a very distinctive location. There's one garden where Mary Pickford was. my favorite book is my next book. You know.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. What were the other books that you wrote?
The other books that I've already written,
Yeah.
called Way Back When.
Okay.
It's the best stories of the year for Santa Barbara, years 1914 through 1919. I also wrote Mesopedia, History of the Mesa. And I also wrote a book called Discovering the History of Your House and Your Neighborhood.
So Mesopedia.
Mesopedia, yeah.
Yeah.
I have one more question.
Last question.
This is a general research question. Santa Barbara, in terms of searchable newspapers, is fairly limited in the age.
Yes,
scope. What's it going to sort of take to get 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s? What is the stumbling block?
The stumbling block is the news press.
Okay.
They are only online up to 1922.
Right.
And they are on, and that's online, but they are on microfilm, but that's a long, difficult
Correct.
process, page by page. Yeah, so at this point, and the statute of limitations changes every year, but at this point, anything published in 1926 is in the public domain. So why they haven't opened up, I don't know.
I mean, it's like in terms of cities across the country and newspapers.com and newspaperarchive.com, it's Santa Barbara's inability to share its history. It's sort of a void in this community.
It is, because there's so much history in newspapers.
Correct.
A lot of the interesting stuff comes from newspapers. So,
Someday, somehow.
yeah. Hope I'm still here.
Well, Betsy, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for joining us. We have books available behind the counter right there. So
Have you ever read